Good afternoon, you wonderful, beautiful, bright young minds. My name is Reverend Terrence L. Thomas, and I pastor Bethel AME Church here in Champaign. And today I have the honor of reading to you a great book called Ron's Big Mission. It's by Rose Blue and Corrine Madden, and it's illustrated by Don Tate. So let us begin with Ron's Big Mission. And here we see Ron looking out into the sky and the stars. We've all done that. You're up early this morning, Ron. What's the rush? Asked Mrs. McNear. Come and have your breakfast. I made some oatmeal. I have to go, Mama, said Ron, tying his sneakers. I have to do something this morning. You always have something to do, his mother said with a smile. Just be home by lunchtime, okay? Ron was 9 years old. That morning he left his house with a plan. He'd been thinking about it for a long time. It was a beautiful South Carolina summer day, and Ron looked up at the blue, blue sky. Someday, he thought, he would be up there, flying a plane. He wanted to be a pilot when he grew up. But today, Ron had something else on his mind, something very important. Ron walked down the street as fast as he could. He didn't want to be late. Hi, Ron, the grocer called out from in front of the store. There you are, just in time for a donut. Morning, Mr. Douglas, said Ron. Thank you, but there's someplace I gotta be. And Ron kept on walking. Down by the schoolyard, Ron saw his friend Carl shooting baskets. All right, you made it, Carl, called Carl. Hi, Carl, said Ron. I wish I could stay, but I got something important to do. More important than basketball on summer vacation, said Carl. Are you kidding? Ron laughed. He loved to play basketball, but not today. Today was too important. Ron kept on walking. When Ron got to the city public library, he was stopped. This was it. He was hot from walking so fast, and he was nervous too. He took a deep breath, lifting his head high, and went inside. Mrs. Scott was getting ready for all the people who would be using the library today. As the head librarian, she had to make sure that everything was neat and orderly. Mrs. Scott looked up to welcome her first visitor of the day. She smiled as Ron walked in. He was her best customer. He gave a little wave to Mrs. Scott and went right to the shelves. It took Ron a while to find some books. He always looked for books that showed children who looked like him, but it was hard. There were not many books about black kids on the shelf. At last, Ron found some books on airplanes. He took the books and started to walk to the front desk. Ron felt nervous as his hands felt a little sweaty, but he knew what he wanted to do. Mrs. Fielding, a white lady who was often in the library, stopped him. Can you give me books and I'll check them out for you, Ron? She said gently. No thanks, Mrs. Fielding. I'm going to do it by myself today. But Ron, she started to say. Ron was already on his way to the front desk. He put his books on the counter. I'd like to check these out, please, said Ron. The desk clerk didn't look at him. Didn't she hear me? Ron wondered. Ron knew what he had to do. He jumped up on the counter. He wanted the desk clerk to know he was serious. I'd like to check out these books, he said quietly. At first, the desk clerk and Mrs. Scott just looked at each other. You know you can't check out these books, Ron, said Mrs. Scott. You can read them here in the library. That's the rule. Only white people can check books out from the library. Ron looked at Mrs. Scott and the desk clerk politely, but he would not budge. I always read them here. Today I want to check them out, said Ron. Mrs. Scott and the desk clerk did not know what to do. Ron wouldn't get off the counter. People were staring. Finally, the desk clerk had to call the Lake City police. Two policemen came right over. Let someone check the books out for you, son, said one of the policemen. You know the rules. But Ron just shook his head. He would not budge. See, he's standing there. He would not budge. Now Mrs. Scott called Ron's mother. Mrs. McNear came to the library very quickly. I know how you feel, baby, but you have to follow the rules. I can't, Mama. Ron told her. It's wrong. The rules are not fair. Why can't I check out books like everybody else? No one said anything. Not the desk clerk, not Mrs. Scott, not the policeman. not even Ron's mother. Mrs. Scott looked at Ron. She thought about all the times that Ron came into the library and all the times he sat at tables for hours looking over so many books. He was her best customer, and she knew what she had to do. Mrs. Scott walked into the back of her office and started writing. Ron wondered what she was doing. Mrs. Scott returned and handed Ron a library card. His library card. Ron looked at Mrs. Scott and smiled. As he jumped on the floor, he thought he saw her smile too. "I'd like to check these books out, please," he said, handing the card across the desk. The desk clerk took his library card, stamped the cards on the back of the books. "These are due back in 2 weeks," she said. Ron smiled. "Thank you," he said. He tucked the books under his arm and took his mother's hand. Together they walked home. Ron couldn't wait to get to his room and open to page 1. Now, why is this book important? This book is important because it's about the life of Ron McNeil. Ron McNeil will become one of the first black astronauts in NASA, and he ultimately did go to space because he was able to read. Keep that in mind. Always pursue your dreams, always pursue your education, and you too can be like Ron. Bye bye.